Okay, Boker Tov. We are back in our sort of regular setting after being the last, I think, 3 Sundays being on the road in one way or one form or another. So we are back. We are back, and we have some stuff to share, some Torah to learn. It's Sunday morning. We don't rush. We try to get to the bottom of some things over here. So today's question, and I hope I don't get, what did they say today? I hope I don't get canceled for this discussion. I hope I don't get stoned, or at least digitally stoned for today's discussion. Although I want to make it clear that I'm not issuing sort of a halachic opinion. This is discussion. It's a Torah discussion we're having today. And, I want to raise the issue, and I saw, a thing or two, which is interesting, and I'm going to share that. But first, let's make a bracha. I don't know if I said Boker Tov, so a wonderful morning to you here in southern Florida. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh bidvaro. So, the topic of today's class is really 2 topics, and maybe we'll bring them together depending on the amount of time we end up having. And that is, the question is, I don't remember the exact title, but what it basically is it Jewish? Is it a Torah thing to watch the Super Bowl, to watch sports, to watch football? Let's discuss it a little bit, okay? Let's talk about it, because I know that this is I'm treading on, as I say, very thin ice. This is like basic breathing for Americans. So so let's have a little bit of a discussion. I know just a little bit of. I'm not a big maven on football. I can tell you right now, I am not. I grew up in Brooklyn. Give us a thumbs up for Brooklyn. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I followed baseball. I grew up as a Yankee fan, and I don't think I ever watched football when I was. I mean, not that I could remember when I was growing up in Brooklyn. It was all baseball. So I'm not a maven at all at football. But nevertheless, let's have a little bit of a discussion. And I did see, just doing a little bit of Google searching, I did see that in today's game, there is no Jewish players on either side of the team. That's at least what Google tells me. But what I did see is that both the head manager, is that the head coach? How is that referred to in footballese? Both the head coach and the owner of the team. I brought up the article, and then I don't see the article here. So if you know the answer, you're welcome to post. But basically what I've seen is, here we go. This is an article from the Times of Israel. So I'm reading. While there won't be any Jewish players on the field when the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles this Super Bowl Sunday in Phoenix, there are still plenty of Jewish angles to the game. First, there's Eagles general manager, Howie Roseman, and owner Jeffrey Lurie, both of whom are Jewish. So there you go. So I guess on the Eagles side, we have, in the sort of upper management ownership, we have Jews represented. It says over there, during the Deshaun Jackson anti-Semitism controversy in 2020, during which then Eagle Star posted then deleted anti-Semitic quotes online, Jackson apologized personally to Roseman and Lurie. Okay, so there we have a Jewish side. So does that mean that you are rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs to win? Is that that's the Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia Eagles. Okay, does that mean that we're supposed to root for the Eagles? I'm asking. Tell me. Who am I supposed to pray for? Who am I supposed to root for over here? Okay. Now, I do want to sort of approach this also from a little bit of a different discussion. And listen to this. And I'm raising the discussion over here, okay? As I said right away, I'm not issuing an opinion, but a raising discussion, again, based on some things that I've seen and read. So, the Super Bowl, I think, tell me if I'm right about this, is the most watched episode on TV, on cable TV, whatever it might be, and or streaming through whatever media venue or so. So my question to you is: I see somebody's rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay, so I hear you. You tell me who I should be rooting for. But I want to bring out, there's an interesting discussion over here. And again, you really are welcome to give me your feedback, of course. And that is, in general, should we be watching the Super Bowl? Should we be watching football? Now, why not? What would be even the issue that should even sort of touch our conscience? So we are all, I've of course even seen it on the news and so on about Damar Hamlin, who just went through a very serious injury, and thank God he's apparently recovering and so on. So here the question becomes: should we? Isn't it? So from a sort of Torah perspective, a Jewish perspective, because that's where we come from, we always want to know, okay, what would be the Torah perspective on even, and not only even, but most importantly, cultural issues and how we should approach it. So my question that I pose over here is, should we as Jews be watching football? We as Jews, I say Jews because, we're Jews and we follow Torah, but as human beings in general, should be watching football. Now, what's the question? What am I coming from? So there is a Tosefta. There is a Tosefta. Tosefta is like a sort of addendum to the Mishnah. Now, Tosefta is not the code of Jewish law, but this issue is brought down in the code of Jewish law. But let me tell you what the Tosefta is dealing with. Okay, so let me read the Tosefta. Hold on a moment, and you tell me. Whether what conclusion should be drawn from this Tosefta. Okay? This goes back, and I know there are distinctions to be made. So before you throw the spear at me, just listen till the end over here. Okay? In the Tosefta, it has the following discussion. This was, of course, during the times of the Mishnah, and at that time there were the sort of Roman amphitheaters, which today you could even visit, of course, the Colosseum, and you could go to Caesarea or Caesarea, Caesarea in Hebrew, and you have stadiums, and of course we have gladiators. And over there, the Talmud says the following. This is not the Talmud. The Tosefta in Avodah Zarah says the following. He says, the Tosefta says, again, one who sits in a stadium, listen to this, is one who sheds blood. Now, why does the Tosefta say this? Because, of course, with the gladiators, it was a fight to the death. And therefore, the Tosefta says that by you sitting in the stadium, you are supporting it, and it's like you are shedding blood. Okay? Now, do you think that applies to watching football? Now, of course, you will immediately tell me, Rabbi, nobody's shedding blood at a football game. Well, that is true. Nobody's shedding blood, Baruch Hashem, or even the cases of serious injury is very rare, as I understand. You could correct me if I'm wrong. But one thing we could agree on is that the sport is definitely has quite a bit of sort of violence. What I mean by violence is, yes, it's agreed upon violence. And then the question is, again, I'm just presenting sides over here. Then the question is, the fact that there is violence, and sometimes and often people do get hurt, which, according to Torah, by the way, if someone says to you, go ahead and punch me, go ahead and hurt me, you're not allowed to hurt that person, even though they consent. So the question is here, because of our pleasure, meaning the fans' pleasure, and like seeing this interaction, basically much violence, which is what sort of the core of the game is. I got to tackle you. And often that is quite using force and so on. Would you, my listener over here, say that that is a violation of Torah law, or at least of Torah sort of principle, Torah spirit, and therefore by us watching, we are an accomplice to that, and we are encouraging that. So that's one side of the question that I present to you here, my dear friends listening. I want to tell you, going back to the gladiator situation, there's an interesting opinion that the Tosefta brings right after that, and that is, the Tosefta says like this. Tosefta brings an opinion of Rabbi Nosson. Rabbi Nosson disagrees that going to the stadium is like shedding blood, and he gives a total different opinion. And very interestingly, I'll tell you what his opinion is. It's different than what you think. He says like this. Rabbi Nosson says that the reason why you could go, perhaps you should go to the stadium, is because you could actually not, he says the exact opposite. First opinion says it's like you're shedding blood. And he says it's because you're actually saving blood, because as is known, that before the loser was killed by his opponent, they allowed the crowd to shout and cheer whether mercy should be granted. And therefore, Rabbi Nosson says you should be there so that you should be amongst those shouting for mercy for the loser, and as such, you'll be saving a life. Reason number two, he says, I guess sometimes the fighters were actually Jewish slaves, and if the losing fighter was killed, and then you needed witnesses to be able to testify to his wife that he was killed, and that would allow her to be able to get married to someone else. If there's no witnesses, she would be what's called an aguna, a woman where there's no evidence that the husband was killed, and that creates serious problems. So that's what Reb Nosson says why you should attend the stadiums of the Roman gladiators. Both these reasons, opinions of Reb Nosson, I don't think apply to watching football, the NFL. Now, I mean, there's the general question about just wasting time. Is it something where you should be doing something more useful, or can you make the argument that it's relaxing, and by relaxing and enjoying, your health is better, and therefore you could then study Torah, have more patience with your kinderlach, and so on and so forth, which goes into a general discussion. I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from basically all the major sports, the least violent of the sports is baseball, where there's basically no violence. The sport in itself does not call for any violence or any physical force to be used against your opponent and so on, other than when the pitcher deliberately throws the ball at the player, which of course would not be in the Torah spirit. So what am I saying over here? So what we're saying over here is that, is football, from a Torah perspective, considered violent, and therefore by us watching, And cheering, although we are so addicted and so you can't, God forbid, challenge the notion of watching football in this country or the Super Bowl. Is it in the spirit of Torah? So that's the question. You could argue, but there's no harm in giving us some thought, and perhaps when you're sitting and watching, a little Jewish guilt maybe, or perhaps you should be a little concerned about whoever's getting hurt. Whatever, I'm just rambling here. I'm just hacking at Chinik a little bit, but this is sharing some food for thought. If you give me a thumbs up if you know what hacking at Chinik means. Okay. I do want this somewhat as a lead into the more Torah discussion that we're going to have here today. And they interact a little bit with the discussion we had up to this point. And that is a little bit of a follow-up of what I spoke about, I think, 2 weeks ago and so on, based on the parsha that we're just coming from. So it's, a little bit of a related of a continuation, but I want to give it from the parsha that we're coming from's perspective. So this cut last week, we studied and we learned about the Ten Commandments, Parshat Yitro. We learned about God giving us the Ten Commandments, and right after the Torah relates about the Ten Commandments, the Torah says the following verse: "V'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot." And the nation, the people, were able to see the sounds. So commentaries discuss that this, what does it mean, seeing the sounds? How could you see sounds? You could hear sounds, but you don't see sounds. Now, it's interesting that the Baal Shem Tov, in one of the writings of the Baal Shem Tov, it says that what does it mean they saw the sounds? They saw the angels. It says when God appeared at Mount Sinai to give the Torah, there was myriads of angels that came with God. And what does that mean? They saw the sounds that they saw the angels. How does that explain? In other words, they saw that which accompanied the sounds. The sounds referring to the Torah, to the giving of the Ten Commandments. And what they saw was the angels that were there as a result of the sounds. And he goes on to say that when the Baal Shem Tov went ahead, when he was sitting with his students and teaching Torah, you could see angels coming and listening to the Baal Shem Tov teaching Torah. I guess what it means, you can see, meaning if you had sort of spiritual vision. But then there is a deeper explanation that the Rebbe gives, and that already goes to our discussion over here regarding this issue of ro'im et hakolot. And again, I'm going to bring this back to our football discussion as well by the time we finish. So, v'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot, says the Rebbe in an explanation the following. Let's analyze for a moment the difference between sight and sound. There's usually two differences between sight, something we see, and something we hear or something we understand, which is also included in Vayishma Yisro, which is the beginning of in Shmiya, in to hear, to comprehend, to understand. The beginning of the Torah portion is Vayishma Yisro. Yisro heard. And he heard, and he took action as a result of the fact that he heard. Let's talk about two distinctions and their connection. They're interconnected. Why these two distinctions between sight and sound? So Hasidus discusses the following. Usually, what is it that we see? We see material things. We don't see radio waves. We don't see angels. We don't see spiritual entities. We don't see it. We hear or we understand, we learn about it, but we don't see it, right? What do we see? I could see this table. I could see this phone. I could see material, physical things. Another difference between hearing and seeing is that which we see is something that has far more impact upon us, becomes a lot more part of us. I saw it. You can't convince me otherwise. I saw it. When you hear something, especially if it's something explained to you, I can question the certainty, the oneness with you is not the same. It's something that is becomes less part of who you are. When you see something, it's something that becomes much more part of you, of who you are. And these two things are connected. In other words, why is it that we can only hear and understand spiritual things? Because since we ourselves are materialistic, so the unity, the oneness of sight could only be with something else that's material, that's mundane. But something lofty, something spiritual, we cannot see it. Why can't we see it? Because we cannot become one with it as something that we see because of our lowliness. It's something that we can understand, which is a certain level of connection, but it's not as deep as one with our soul as something that we see. No, we usually become traumatized by something that we see. I was at a shiva last week, and the child told me that they were there when their mother took their last breath. The child broke down crying and how it traumatized them. Versus if I hear my mother took the last breath, it's also very upsetting. Someone's mother, my mother should live long and many more years, but someone's mom, when you hear it, it's also difficult, but not the same, doesn't have the same impact as something that you actually see. So here, the Torah tells us, the people saw the sounds. What is the deeper message over here? That by the giving of the Torah, when God gave the 10 Commandments, the Torah, we were elevated to such a level that we became on a much more lofty, elevated spiritual level that we can experience the holy, the spiritual, the godly with our sight. So ro'im, they saw the sounds, in this context means that which usually we could only hear, they're like sounds to us, they're more distant. Because of its loftiness, we now could become one with it like we would be seeing it. I hope that is clear. In other words, let me try to sort of bring this home and practical. In other words, it became their truest reality, like something you experience through sight. So I want to talk about that, and here I want to get more serious about the football discussion. And this is not an attack on football per se. And it's not meant as an attack, it's meant more as an inspiration to all of us. And this boils down to the following. What is your reality? What is my reality? What is our reality? I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, and I want to give this a little bit more perspective, a little bit more depth. What's our reality? Obviously, the reality, which the things we see, in other words, the things that are very real to us, as something that we see and becomes one with us, is very much affected by the things that we experience, not only through sight, but things that we are constantly exposed to. Our brain works in such a way that things that we are constantly here and exposed to, that affects us, becomes our reality. And I mentioned, for example, you have people in this country that are very much to the right in the way they think, and people who are more to the left in the way they think. Call it conservative, call it liberal. And as a result, especially the way today's algorithms of technology works, is that you usually see and you click on things which agree with you. And as a result of that, that becomes our reality, and we cannot really see a different reality, or it's extremely difficult. And that works in both directions. Now, sports is, for the most part, more harmless. But it also, like everything else, the question becomes is, what is your reality? Meaning, how much of your life, the sports, as well as other just mundane things take up your life, and how much is your reality about holiness? I want to, highlight this with a story I once heard, and I think this is a very poignant story. I mentioned it yesterday on Shabbat. It's a very poignant story about realities and your reality versus objective reality versus true reality, and how do you define true reality, and how does the reality that you have created for yourself affect you? So I remember years ago, it just sort of stuck in my mind. I was listening to a psychologist or psychiatrist comedian. What I mean is he actually did a show. I don't remember his name. He would do a performance, comedic sort of performance based on real life and real life patients that he's had and experience that he's had in his profession as a psychiatrist, I believe. This, years ago, psychiatry and psychology were a little bit more mixed together. Today, they're sort of two distinct professions, but at that time, I believe they were a little more intertwined. But so he mentioned a story. He said he had a patient, and he's talking to the audience. He said he had a patient that every single morning would come down in great joy and announce that she had a baby. Every day, Mazel Tov, she had a baby. The Talmud tells us that when in the future, when Mashiach comes, the prophets talk about, and in the prophet it says, Hora v'yeledas yachtav, that in one day a woman will become pregnant and not have to wait 9 months. That's one of the miracles of the future. But in this case, this woman would every single day come down and announce that she gave birth to a child. Mazel Tov, she gave birth to a child. And the speaker explained the situation. He says, look, this lady sadly did not merit to have the ability to have the greatest blessing in life, which is to have children. She couldn't have children, and she was so distraught, she was so devastated that she went mentally insane. And the result of that was that every single day she came down and she announced to everybody that she just gave birth to a child. And the speaker turns to the audience and he asks the audience, he says, should I heal this lady? Should I explain to her that this is just sort of a figment of her imagination? And in truth, she didn't have a child. And then she'll be miserable and she'll be in pain. Or should I allow her to remain in this bubble that she created and be happy? And that was the question he asked the audience. And this is the story as I remember it. I remember hearing this lecture, this presentation years ago. And it stuck in my mind because there's a message over here. In some ways, we are that woman. And there's a healthy element to that, which means that there's a certain reality that we create for ourselves in order for us to be able to cope with life. But it has its dangers. It has its dangers because it works both ways. There are times that we create a reality which makes us miserable and sad, and it's just a reality that we have created, but it's not real. And various examples to that where we could create a reality which causes us anxiety, sadness, or pain, and it's just not the truth. So when we're learning about the Aseres Hadibros, we're learning about the Ten Commandments and Torah, and we are so fixated on sports and football and so on. When we're coming from Matan Torah, we're coming from the week that God gave us the Torah. And the Torah tells us, V'chol ha'amro imet hakolot, the people saw the sounds. And as explained, it means that they became so connected, like something you're seeing, with the reality of the Torah, reality of God's revelation. We live in a time where there's such exposure to to mundane or negative or or fearful, anxiety-inducing realities, um, moral deficient realities and information, which constantly comes our way. It has to affect us. Therefore, when we come from the giving of the Torah, it is so important that we counterbalance that with the V'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot, to be able to elevate ourselves and connect. And there's a special strength and energy when we read it in the Torah, about the giving of the Torah, to be able to connect ourselves to a sort of a critical counterbalance reality, a holy reality, a godly reality, especially that is the truest reality. All the other realities, be it political bent, be it be it cultural, be it societal, these are all subjective realities. But then there are absolute realities that comes from our Creator. It comes from Torah. These are absolute realities. We are blessed that we can connect and we can see the sounds, the holiness of those absolute realities, which again, as I cannot stress enough, is critical for truth, for our direction, purpose in life, for our sanity, for raising our kindalach. It's critical to connect and allow that absolute reality to counterbalance all the mishigas that we are constantly exposed to, including the Super Bowl, which, whether you choose to watch or not to watch and enjoy and so on, remember one thing, whether you feel that you should be watching and you're a party to it or not, do it. Do it at the very least. At the very least, remember that is not the truest reality. It's not, and I'm sure you know that, but it's good to remember that as much time as you're going to spend on excitement in who wins and this play and that play, how about we make the resolution? Let's settle. Let's compromise over here. Let's settle that you make the resolution that you will spend equal time in connecting to the truest and most absolute reality, both for yourself and your kindalach. And it will do you and me and all of us so much good. So I think, there's some thoughts, food for thought over here. Let's connect again to that truest reality. And thank you for allowing me to share these words of Torah. I get positive feedback from many, and it's appreciated. And of course, if you disagree or you have questions, you're welcome to reach out. So everybody have a wonderful week, blessed week, and thank you.